I could move on to...
Sorry.
Changing the subject rather, and it's because of an incident that happened on June the 28th and indeed on July the 11th 2 years ago. My street has been very badly flooded with sewage, and we've had some very interesting conversations with the council recently and with Thames Water, who we managed to get up there, who said that the Victorian drain system is obviously under enormous pressure from the vast quantities of people already living there, and I shudder at the sort of idea of the population increase you're mentioning. But were they to make any remedies, they really need open space in which to start putting excess situations. I can't think of a polite way to describe it, but anyway, new sewage needs to be built, but they need open spaces in which to do it. And that is beginning to be a sort of source of concern to us that we hadn't even thought about before. But in the area where I live, which is Little Venice, short of putting one underneath the canal, where would you put it? And as we face flooding again this week, I've been given my own pair of Wellington boots by Thames Water, which should tell you how bad the sewage is that we have to cope with in the basins.
It is quite shocking, isn't it, Elizabeth?
Yes.
It really is. The Thames, I know, just for a point of information, that Thames Water are developing their plans to build a sewage tunnel from somewhere like Hammersmith in the west down to, is it Bow? It's going
to Beckton. I went on the trip on the boat to get informed about these tideway tunnels, they're called.
Thank you.
And but it's not for now. It's not immediate.
2020, I
exactly,
think.
And it's going to. But that's the long term. But
Every
for the
2
short term,
years.
there is a serious problem which I'm also dealing with. So I quite like to work on that.
I think as well, sorry, I was just going to raise, we need to be looking at sustainable urban drainage systems as well. I mean, when new developments come online, we can't just rely on these major pieces of infrastructure, and new developments have to do the bit as well.
I'd like to second that.
Attenuating water,
Yes,
absolutely.
but I don't know what one does about the older buildings, but certainly the new ones.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's something we need to certainly take away. Yes.
I was just going to say a similar thing, and that green roofs are also really important when it comes to that because they delay the runoff, so they'll also make a difference.
I think before we move on to the next section, there is a bullet point here about temporary allotments and community gardens on long-term vacant sites, and I think, I really would like to know what people think about this, whether it's the sort of garden gorillas, that if there's a vacant plot, is it something that we're looking for, that on planning terms, that people could automatically turn those into gardens? Is that what we want to look at here?
I think it's the officers, Tom.
Well, we're not just looking in terms of obviously long-term vacant sites, it's also looking at different uses of, say, council-owned sites or around council estates. And I know Councillor Harvey has set out that we do sometimes have other priorities, but it's looking at what we can do with what we've got in Westminster, acknowledging that Westminster is very built up, and just looking at sort of around the edges, where is there potential, and then what can we do with that potential? And one suggestion is gardens such as community gardens or temporary allotments.
I mean, interestingly, the planters in Glastonbury have now been turned into small allotments for the residents there, and they're growing food for each other, and it's perhaps a little more how it should be. Please.
I don't know whether it's relevant to this, but you've just said it's really dense city and we haven't got a lot of open space. And if you took the royal parks off, you would have very little open space in Westminster that you're managing or looking after. And I was wondering whether or not there isn't a way we can join up other issues in Westminster, for example, making some streets, I know it's happened in some areas of Camden, where a street is sealed off to become cycle-only access, and the square is created at the end of the street. So it's like, there's the only space we have left is the streets. We're talking about increasing runoff and everything. If we could devote some network of green-linked cycle spaces linked in with streets that are cut off from cars to create these kind of small green squares, pocket parks, all over, wherever we could find cul-de-sacs. I mean, I can think of where I live. There's a dead end. You don't need to drive down there. You could go the other way. We could have a small square, Taunton Place, for instance. You don't need to go in and out of all these network of streets. Maybe somehow cycles could, or people could, and the parks could be punctuate the urban landscape. And that would be, I don't know, maybe if we could link it with cycling and all the other issues. Because there isn't a lot of space.
We all introduced ourselves before you arrived. So I'm Angela Harvey. I'm
Gabby
one of the
Hicks
councillors.
from the St Marylebone Society.
Thank you.
And I know because recently we've been campaigning for a public open space in Moxon Street, and fortunately after the master plan was included, so that was a really good positive outcome. So we're really keen on more public owned space, but I wondered whether or not we can think small, think of big developers and putting all the onus onto them to provide it. If we look with what we've got and from a grassroots level just identify, even with Paul Akers, as Paul here, he's on the list.
No, it's
Paul
not
and
here
I
yet.
have been identifying tree spaces. It's by starting with something small like that in the neighbourhood that you know and then joining it together. It sounds simple, but I'm sure it's lots of other reasons why you can't do it. But those could be maybe one idea for the urban spaces.
I wonder, adding to that, if it's possible to consider temporary play streets.
Yes,
I would
thinking.
hate to be in a street where kids were playing, all the time, and I knew that for the rest of my life there was going to be a lot of noise and so on. But if it only occurred in my street for 6 months every 4 years, I'd be delighted.
Or in summer,
Or just in
off-peak
summer
hours or
for
something.
during the summer holidays or something like that.
Okay. I've looked at, I know Terry Farrell's big on this as well, because he has this green links across the parks. And even sometimes just taking a few cars out and putting trees in can make it more of an amenity space. Don't have to go and sit in it, you can look at it to enjoy it.
Well, I would like to add window boxes once again.
And let me add window boxes. You can grow almost anything, and I've had a kitchen garden of window boxes for 25 years. And my blueberries are just coming into season.
I'll come and see
If
you
everybody
soon.
had a window box, if you could encourage by having ready-made or a source of window boxes or suggestion or how you might do it or some kind of educational encouragement through the children, it's such fun.
And can I add to that, Anne? When I was Cabinet Member for Housing, we looked at design of balconies, for example, and that balconies should only be given permission for if there was enough space for the people who lived in that flat to be able to get round a dining table, so that it didn't become just an external storage space. And we know that the blot on the landscape that can cause in certain areas. I don't know, I'm not leading this anywhere, but I just wondered if anybody else thought that might be a good idea.
Big enough for a plant. You want it big enough for a plant.
For the people living there to go out and dine and eat out
You
there.
can achieve the same thing by having openable walls off your living space to a small balcony.
If you would like to go and look at the small balconies and see what becomes of them.
Like
in
a
lots of,
balconette, a Juliet, whatever.
well, in that case, what you do is inside. Once it's on the balcony, it becomes public space, and it's often a public eyesore. So,
Because I've worked with developers who don't like it to be more than 600 because you can't get a fridge out there.
When Westminster takes the trouble to put a planter, as it has outside Pimlico Station, a big metal planter, and fills it with expensive plants, and then ignores it, so they all die, I get quite sad, because this business of originating these things and then doing nothing about them is very disappointing.
would you rather, instead of expensive plants, would you rather have herbs and things that people could come along and pick as they
Well, you
went?
think
or
they would pick them, do you? But I don't know I don't mind what you put in it, so long as you keep it
Look
in
after
decent
it,
order. Yes.
Indeed.
Could
Gentlemen.
I suggest that you're talking about balconies, that you encourage architects to design balconies which are really user-friendly and not the sort of 90 degrees boxes. You really there are some very avant-garde architects, and you really should look at it and you should encourage it, and you should make sure that the developers shouldn't always be looking at the bottom line, because otherwise, if we continue to be as complacent as we have been up till now, I don't think that future generations will